we're late, and I apologise for that.
And he wasn't even driving.
No.
My fault. He wasn't.
Obviously, a large audience here, so first survey. Does anyone listen to the podcast? We're in trouble now. You know what to expect then. This is the kind of level of technical expertise. I'm trying to disappear off camera because we've got 4 people, well, Phil's from the magazine, he's on the podcast all the time, aren't you, Phil?
Can't get rid of me.
You had to run it last week in Doncaster.
I did.
Did a superb job there. But joining us today, he joined us for the first one of these shows in Leeds. He was in York a few weeks ago as well. Peter Smith of the Yorkshire Evening Post. And then 2 men who have crossed the divide in Hull with varying levels of controversy. Obviously, when Craig Murdock made the move, it was all over the front page of the Hull Daily Mail, back page, everywhere.
That was just the whole fan celebrating. Yeah.
Scorer of Rugby Union's greatest ever try, as we say. You must get sick of being asked about that. It's like Paul Anderson being asked about that goal kick.
It's quite bizarre. I think I'm the only rugby league player in history that's greatest moment is playing rugby union. So yeah, but I can. It's better to be famous for something, I suppose, Rich, than nothing at all. So yeah, we'll go with that.
And Paul Cooke, of course, famously. How are you, Paul?
Yeah, really well. I think very much the same as Phil, just chatting then. Very much having withdrawal symptoms from what was a wonderful World Cup, Rugby League World Cup, in all formats, and yeah, looking forward to the start of the new Super League season and maybe continuing to grow the international game at the same time.
As a broadcasting geek, I was very happy to see people whose names I knew on the end of the big long list of credits at the end of the World Cup. And yet you both were on there. I mean, what experience was that like working behind the microphone at the World Cup?
Yeah, wonderful. I managed to see Lebanon against Ireland in Lee, and then the Irish faced New Zealand at Headingley. So, but not just that. On top of that, to be a small part of it, along with Craig and everybody else that worked so hard to promote the game on varying different levels of media outlets, whether that was the TV or whether it was the radio. I just thought, just privileged to be a part of and play a small part of.
Craig, your World Cup, how would you have summed it up, your own personal tournament?
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Obviously, really pleased to be invited to do a game on TV at short notice, and then the reality of realising it was Fiji v Italy, which was a bit of a worry and a bit of a shock to the system.
Did you get a phonetic name for them?
Yeah. Credit to our friend Matt Wilson, who absolutely, the best in the business, absolutely helped me out with some of the pronunciations. But as you would, this is a story, and this can only happen in rugby league. So again, I'll probably say it many times. I think we're amazingly self-critical of our sport in rugby league, and what we don't do is we don't pat ourselves on the back enough for when we do things right. And I think we did this rugby league. Again, how innovative we are as a sport. We were the first with the video ref. I'm sure that this now will become the norm, that all these tournaments happen all at the same time. But going back to my World Cup experience, I think what I'll take back away with me was I did Italy and Fiji, as I said, for the TV, and the one criticism I got was through Kyler Moore's Twitter. Somebody had said, really good, but you did ever so well because your co-commentator kept calling you Carlo again. So the only name I got wrong was Kyler Moore. So there we go.
Surely that's the accent.
And I blame the accent. So I'm sure I said Kyle. I'm sure I said Kyle. But yeah, if that was the worst thing that went wrong in that game, I could live with that.
The first thing I said to Mark when I saw him at the St James's Park in the press room before the England-Samoa opener was, I looked at the fixtures, Mark, and I saw Monday night in Doncaster, Greece versus France. That's nailed on for you doing that one, isn't it?
Yeah. And what a wonderful moment. The Greece try, the first one in the World Cup. And the backstory of Greece is obviously a phenomenal story, isn't it? Where it was illegal to play, and I think there was a story where they told the police there was playing a game and advertised that there was going to play a game in one city.
Yeah.
And they juked the police because they went to shut it down, and there was this completely different city that was playing
games at midnight.
At midnight, yeah, and it's a fantastic story.
And now, this weekend is the second weekend of the Greek domestic season, both men and women. And that's built on the back of, now it's an acknowledged sport. Yeah. The women have played in the Euro B there on the road to qualifying for the 2025 World Cup. The men have got a great story, haven't they? And they were the team that brought 8 domestic players, played them all throughout the World Cup, 4 of them on the pitch at one time against England. And those guys have gone back not just to be players, but player coaches, take the knowledge that they've learned. So yeah, I think you're right. We've said it before. This is sort of our wind up of the World Cup. But the first half of the men's tournament was purely storytelling, and a bit like the Football World Cup at the moment. There's a lot of that going on as well, and we shouldn't be too self-critical of that. We should just enjoy telling the story.
I'm just hoping no one wants any books about the Second World War while we're talking. there's not much room behind us, but just in case. Now, Peter, you've been with us twice. In Leeds before the tournament started, in York midway through. Fair to say, Phil is relentlessly positive. You're more realistic. Sum up the World Cup. Because in York, you weren't buying into this whole it's the best thing that's ever been. But where are you now on World Cup 2021?
I think as a whole the tournament was a success, but I think it could have been better. As I said in York, I think some of the venues weren't right. They were too big. The crowds problem wasn't the crowds, it was the number of empty seats in venues. I think I probably mentioned York, Tonga versus Cook Islands. I went to 8,000 there, which is, I think it's a good attendance for Tonga against Cook Islands. In a place like Middlesbrough, which has no rugby league tradition, I think it was the first rugby league game played in Middlesbrough. You play that in a venue the size of, say, Craven Park or Halifax or somewhere like that, it'd be great. But in a 33,000 capacity venue, too many empty seats. It didn't really create an atmosphere. I think there was a little bit too much of that in the opening stages of the tournament. I'm not too concerned about the one-sided scorelines. I think you get those. The compensation was seeing the likes of Jamaica and Greece playing in the tournament. I thought it really picked up from probably the quarter-finals onwards. We had 2 fantastic semi-finals in the men's tournament. I thought the final was a decent final without, obviously, it was never really, there wasn't going to be a shot, was there? But Samoa were relatively competitive, and it was a good attendance, a good occasion. I thought the women's tournament was terrific. Again, some cracking games in that. I think my favourite game from the tournament was Australia women against New Zealand women. I thought that was just a superb game. The wheelchair tournament was fantastic from start to finish. I was lucky enough to be at the final, and that's something I'll remember for a very, very long time for a number of reasons. So overall, yeah, I think it was a good tournament. I thought the 2013 tournament in this country was better, but I think overall you certainly class it as a success. So I think the important thing is what we do now, make sure we build on it. From the things that really worked, like the women's game and the wheelchair, and make sure that we build on the success of the last few weeks. Every game was televised. For a rugby league fan, it was just 6 weeks of wall-to-wall rugby. It couldn't be any better. But
I mean, Phil can't wait for Boxing Day now, can you? You can't wait to see Leeds reserves versus Wakefield reserves. I mean, I can't wait. I should have come up with these introductions before we come in. And I forget, Paul Cooke, of course, former Wakefield star, and forgot to introduce him.
I think the thing about what happens now is there's very much a possibility it could be after the Lord Mayor's show, and that's what we've got to guard against, particularly in the domestic game. We've got to make sure that it looks and feels a little bit different and matches what we've seen while the World Cup was on. I think we can talk about where we think the international game will go a bit later on. But I think, again, it's the metrics you use to decide whether it's been a success or not. And 30 million people watched it on the BBC. We've never had that kind of exposure before. What was it, 194 million impressions across various digital platforms. So again, we've never had digital platforms for a World Cup before. So 2013 was a great World Cup, but there are so many ways now that you can find your rugby league. The Rock preaching the word of Samoa in the lead up to the final Did he have something like 350 million people on his Instagram feed? I'm pretty sure that he knew very little about rugby league until he was told Samoa were playing, but he was incredibly earnest about what he was asking them to do. And of his 350 million that he was preaching to, they will have now known what rugby league is. And I think when you add those sort of figures into, was it 500,000 people actually attended games, that it actually was a success. I think the one thing you have no control over is what's on the field, and we were pretty lucky. We were just talking earlier that the men's competition was in two halves. The first half, the ability to tell the story of, I thought Lebanon was a great story. You know, Michael Checker, arguably the most charismatic coach we had in the whole competition. Greece, as we mentioned. Jamaica, the ability to interview some young lads who'd come over from Jamaica to talk about what they were going to do going back. We've never had that opportunity before. That's fantastic. Women's competition, I think, the big standout game for me, with the greatest respect to Australia, New Zealand and York, was the best quality of it. It was Brazil-Canada.
Yeah.
Partly because of the extraordinary way the game finished, but also because Brazil reminded us why we fell in love with the game in the first place. They were so refreshing. And the wheelchair, the way that finished, couldn't have been better for the tournament as a whole. But again, talking to people like the USA and what they're now hoping to do on the back of having played in a World Cup, I think that there are endless possibilities. What we need to get away from is thinking, it's Lee against Wakefield 3 times next year. We've got to change that.
But I think, sorry, just to put in there as well, I think for me, a big thing about this World Cup, and I've gone on about this for years and years and years for people who listen to me around here, we've gone away from what we were as an entertainment. Rugby league for me had just become something that we did because we were passionate about it and we'd always done it. Was it fun to watch? No. Was it sometimes boring? Yeah. Was there any excitement? No. And then you look at this, not only the men's World Cup, but for me the big legacy of this World Cup will be the wheelchair rugby. We've already seen it, and I've been shouting about it, how good it was, and people are like, right, yeah. People are now, there's clubs jumping up all over the place wanting to play wheelchair rugby. That's amazing, absolutely amazing. And for me, that will be, this World Cup will be the birth of a boom sport in wheelchair rugby league.
We were saying this in the Wayne, Phil. We've got to take advantage as a sport of that while the iron is hot. In so much as that, if you look at previous Olympics where Great Britain's won the gold medal in curling or whatever, and everyone goes, I want to go play curling. Well, you can't do that because an ice rink and some stones and stuff. But a lot of clubs now have these wheelchairs available to them. Hull have a club, Leeds obviously is the former champions, Halifax the champions, Wiggins. They all have these chairs available for people, and they're all trying out sessions. And it was great to see Phil Roberts, who was on the show when we were in Ashton back seemingly months ago now. He tweeted a picture yesterday of loads of people in Wigan just trying it out.
I could imagine, imagine, couldn't you, 7:30 on a weekday night, a spot for wheelchair rugby would have as big an audience as Emmerdale and EastEnders, because it is entertainment. Absolutely fantastic. And people, obviously living in Hull and working in Hull, 99% of people are aware of rugby league, but not everybody watches it. People I work with, none of them are rugby league fans, were absolutely spellbound by wheelchair rugby league, and that's fantastic.
I think figures tell you part of the story. 1.3 million watched the final.
There you go.
With the greatest respect to Sky, who have kept the game going for 20 odd years, if they get 200,000 for a men's Super League game, that's a good figure. BBC Two stayed on air for half an hour after the World Cup final because they wanted the reaction, they wanted the interviews, they wanted the stories, and the best stories are in wheelchair rugby league. The people that play it are absolutely fantastic. But I think there's two things now. It's what do we do domestically in terms of participation? Because all of the teams that you just mentioned, the Leeds and the Halifax and the Wigan, they've been doing this for about 5 years. They've got to the elite level. So, Hull KR are one of the clubs through their foundation that are saying we're trying rugby league in a wheelchair. I think Batley are doing it. York are doing it. So Wakefield, I think, in their second go. So the elite teams are looking to have development sides underneath them, and more clubs are going to play it. Widening the pool is exactly what we're all about. I think whether it's men's, women or wheelchair will do that relatively quickly. But we shouldn't expect anybody who gets in a wheelchair to, Paul would be fantastic at wheelchair rugby league because he's got the vision of how you play the game, and he can bring abled and disabled people onto a ball, and you should try it. You'd be fantastic.
I'll have a go.
I love the idea. You don't have to tackle.
You'd be
You don't have to tackle. Yeah, the happy days to me. Yeah.
But what's your view? Yeah, you say that though, Craig. But then you say you don't have to tackle, and then you see some of the, you know,
It's easy to tackle.
I would
Yeah,
rather try and not make a tackle on a normal rugby league field.
No, you're right. Absolutely.
Than be in a wheelchair where somebody's going to actually knock me over,
Yeah.
and it might hurt.
Which brings us round to the point that the French were making after they lost in the final.
The French lost, didn't they? They lost.
I was in the apparently, yeah.
Were there some sour grapes in the press room?
Press conference was extraordinary. 22-minute long whinge by the French, who I may have missed. You were there as well. You might have. I don't recall them congratulating England at any stage.
No, they definitely didn't.
They just complained for 20 minutes about
They
various
complained about the rules that they invented.
Yeah, one of the things they were saying was that it's now getting sports already basically too tough for quadriplegic people because of the use of non-disabled athletes in the sport. I just wondered what you thought about that. I mean, the big thing that was made about the wheelchair game during the World Cup was how inclusive it is.
Well, that's
male, female, disabled, non-disabled, and I think that's a big strength of it. And I can see what the French are saying to an extent, but you have to have two. Is it a maximum of two non-disabled people in the team? Five aside. And I think that balance is probably just about right. But what do you think?
No, I think again, we were talking about it before, is the fact that it is so anybody can play it, and regardless of your your body shape or whatever. And I was saying to the audience here that you go back 20 years, we all remember a rugby team run out onto a pitch. You didn't need numbers to know who played where. Whereas now a rugby team comes out, you've no idea because everybody's the same. Everybody's big, strong, fast, tough. I think, and that wheelchair, what your body shape is, anything about you is kind of irrelevant because everybody's the same when they're strapped into one of those chairs, and it's so fast, it's so physical. As I said, for me, it is the greatest sport that I've seen in new sport to my eyes in the last 10 years.
I think you've got to split the elite level and the community level. That there is always going to be room for anybody to play this sport, but you're going to have to be damn good to play at elite level. When you look at,
and that's how it should be.
Exactly, in any variance of sport. So you look at Jack Brown or Nathan Collins; they've honed their art over the last 5 or 6 years. So I don't have an issue. I think the French were throughout the tournament looking for reasons why they had an inkling they might not win it. And wanted to get some agenda before they play it again in 2025. But no, I think I know of somebody who is a quadriplegic who is going to Halifax next Monday to play for the very first time. They're not interested in playing for England in the 2025 World Cup. They love the idea that even though they are disabled to the point of where society is almost telling them there is a limit to what they can do, they can go and get smashed around in their wheelchair. And they love the thought of that. They may only ever go once or twice. They may make some new friends that they wouldn't have previously come across. They might become part of a community team. That's what we're all about. So no, I think we can take the French complaints with the pinch of salt it deserves.
I mean, they did start talking about the referee after the semi-finals. It was quite good.
Very French.
Are we allowed
to say that in this world?
Have you ever seen a refereeing display like the French gentleman on the...
No.
And I think you've spoken to referees in your time.
Beyond belief, isn't it? It's beyond belief what you witnessed. And as you said, 1.3 million people witnessed that. And it will be, for as much as the final will be remembered for England winning and the winning try and what a great spectacle it was, that will come out of it as well. I think I've abused referees for a lot in my time, and I've never ever been abused back by anybody. But it's phenomenal. It was phenomenal to watch.
But it added to the lore of the coverage, and it was great that France lost because he became a comedic figure. And people will talk about that in the context of it was wheelchair rugby league. The other thing I think is we've now got a slightly separate sport. I mean, the great thing about it is it's clearly rugby league. The rules are rugby league. Rugby union for once must be kicking themselves that they didn't patent the word wheelchair rugby, and also that the rules that they came up with are nothing to do with rugby. This, you have to tactically be rugby league. and there is a direct link, but actually we've got a separate saleable product, like Craig was saying. Now you can go to a broadcaster and say, if we can get you maybe every fortnight, because I don't know if you could replicate that every week,
No.
but a British Super League whereby you will see on your screen, not dissimilar, involving some of the personalities that you've now come to recognise, those players in their club kits, and when the Challenge Cup comes around, the Catalan Dragons will be in it again, and we all know that rivalry now exists between England and France, and we want to promote that for the next 3 years. I think we have a different saleable product, so instead of saying to Sky or Premier or whoever it might be, you can have a game alongside what you've already bought. It's now, you want it, you're going to have to pay some money for it.
It wouldn't just have to be, if you're talking about expanding it wouldn't just have to be rugby league clubs. There'd be no reason why Southampton Football Club couldn't have a wheelchair rugby league team.
Or Saracens Rugby Union.
Saracens Rugby Union.
Only they exist.
It's the sort of sport that can expand beyond our boundaries.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the first people to tweet congratulations to England were Ipswich Town, which I can't imagine Ipswich Town would ever have had a reason to geographically be involved in anything rugby league. But there they were sending their congratulations because they'd been caught up in the euphoria of England winning a World Cup. Well, maybe if we were a bit more proactive than we are, we would then be ringing up the foundation at Ipswich Town and saying, why don't you put on wheelchair rugby league?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be related to your football club. It doesn't have to be in a facility that you own, but your kit can go on 10 people who want to play wheelchair rugby league, and if you're good at it, we've got a southern division you can go in, and there's a potential of being in a Super League.
And they can still be called Ipswich Town Football Club.
And it's the same with Plymouth Argyle if they want to do it. Geographically, the sheet of paper is actually as blank as it's ever been with wheelchair. We're hamstrung a bit with the men's game. Women's we need to look at. Wheelchair actually is this moment to conquer the world.
Because you just need, don't you? There's no venue other than a sports hall, which we've got in every school, every sports centre. Yeah. And I think the success is obvious that we've been talking about wheelchair rugby for 15 minutes now on the back of a World Cup. That says enough for me, doesn't it? Ticking a box, amazing job done by the wheelchair people.
And the Australians aren't good at it yet. this is because they.
That's enough. That'll do for me. That'll do for me.
I want to see New Zealand and Samoans, because I want to see a hacker. I want to see a hacker in a wheelchair. I want to see this spectacle, because that was one of the great things about the World Cup. That, as Phil mentioned, lots of digital impressions and whatever that means of the Samoa-Tonga clash, pre-match clash. They may have never seen any of the match, but they saw the Civi Town versus the Civi Town, and what an epic moment that was.
But I think what it did, going back to the main rugby league or the whole competition, for me, I think it did prove that there's life outside of the NRL. And it was great that those players did choose the indigenous country that they were from. The Samoans and the Tongans that could have played for Australia, could have played for New Zealand, chose those lands, and I think that's massive for those people coming through further on down the line to say, look, play for your country of birth.
Well, off the back of that now, the legacy is of all of that the NRL are going to probably change the rules of state of origin, because they want the best players to play in the state of origin. So, you can't have players that have chosen to play for Samoa playing now for New South Wales or Queensland.
You
and
can,
I think
while they're a tier 2
while they're a tier 2 nation. Yeah,
so the thing to do is not accelerate Samoa and Tonga to be tier 1 nations.
But that's then the NRL looking after the NRL, isn't it?
Well,
to not accelerate them to a tier 1 nation.
Again,
Samoa have just made a World Cup final.
Absolutely.
Should they not be classed as a tier 1 nation?
No, because tier 1 you've got to have a certain level of domestic competition. You've got to have a certain level of finance and governance, and they haven't got it. And this is something Matt Parrish was talking about in the press conference after the final. Don't make us a tier 1 nation. Let our guys play Origin, because we've reached a World Cup final because they know how to play Origin type football. Exactly. But let them play for Samoa when the internationals come around. I think the other great thing to come out of this tournament is it's been player led. And I think you two guys will know far better than we will, who just get the joy of watching the likes of you players, that once players have a voice, it changes the sport a little bit. And every interview we did with someone who was supposedly a heritage player, starting with Luke Keary for Ireland, I think, made such a case as to why it was so important for them to be pulling on that particular shirt, and they want more of it. even Paolo, in the desolation of not winning a World Cup final, was saying, when can we do this again? When can we block out some fixtures so that our guys can play for Samoa again?
But for me as well, in any sport, the pinnacle of any sport is playing for your country.
Yeah.
And rugby league again have gone away from that.
Yeah.
From every kid who I've ever known playing rugby or any sport, their dream, to score a goal in a cup final or to score a try. But it's to play for your country, and if you're lucky enough, I never did it as a professional, but did it 12, 14 times, I think, as a junior international. Even now, it's given me goose pimples at the thought of standing there with your international top on, listening to that national anthem, and still to this day, the 12 most proudest, apart from my kids being born, I think that's a good thing, I'm not sure sometimes, but the proudest moment of my life was playing for my country at under 19 level, listening to those anthems, and we've gone away from that, whereas the pinnacle of our game now is New South Wales against Queensland.
Well, it's the pinnacle of the NRL's game.
It's the pinnacle of our game.
Yeah,
it's the pinnacle of our game.
I agree with that, but this is where
the money involved in it, the sports that tells
completely.
you. But what we've got to do is got to get away from that, and that's why we're going back where the NRL is dictating to the international game what the rules are. It should be the other way around.
Well, if anything, that this World Cup has taught you with the player-led voices. With,
that's what I think.
Junior Paolo playing for Samoa, with Kiri being a part of the Ireland squad. Adam Dewey playing for the Lebanese team, and all of them superstars of our game. Mitchell Moses is going to be the next £1 million player in Australia, who played for Lebanon in the World Cup, and his voice projects so far now that the international game can sort of dictate back to the national sport in Australia.
Well, and that's where I think Michael Cheika was so important, because clearly as a coach his reputation globally is bigger than a nation like Lebanon. But he has already said if they'll have me, he'd like to be around in 2025. Well, theoretically, if Mal Meninga stands down between now and then, he could be a coach of Australia. He's got all the credentials, but he wants. He talked passionately about taking this group of Lebanese players to Beirut this time next year. They don't want to play a game; they just want to invest in their heritage. Now, that kind of thing we haven't had spoken about for as long as I can remember. If he's promoting that message, if players like Moses are saying, this is a guy I want to play for, then there is a chance for International Rugby League to take its proper place at the pinnacle again.
We've got to open a window up for that, haven't we? We can't have it like we've had now, where Sean Wayne's fighting against our Super League competition to get an international break. You look at rugby union, and for all the goods and the bads of rugby league and rugby union, but there's this window every year that everybody knows about, and the Aussies and the Kiwis and South Africa are coming over here and they're playing our teams. We've got to make that window available at some point in our season for an international break that grows the international game, because no sport in this world that is successful has a club that's bigger than the country, and unfortunately that's where we've got to in rugby league. We need to be the World Cup. You look at the football now. We're never going to be football. We're never going to be it. But that World Cup story that's been told now, and you look at where teams like Japan and South Korea and Morocco, and all these are now in the last 16 of the World Cup, and it's just it means so much for those players to be in. You saw Uruguay getting knocked out, and their players absolutely fuming with VAR. So let's not go down that route anyway. We've got enough to sort out without that. But you see what it means to represent your country now. Those guys are on £100,000 a week, but they're absolutely fuming that they've not got a decision, because Uruguay, Suarez, who's probably a billionaire, sat crying because his World Cup is over, playing for his country. That has got to be the pinnacle.
What's funny about
I thought so.
I'm just very basic at times. So I was going to ask you about player power, but I'll ask you something different instead first. And we've spoken to Paul Rowley a couple of weeks ago in Salford, in Stockport rather, and he mentioned it. Ian Watson said it on the telly. Talk about Origin and Yorkshire, Lancashire. Is that what we bring back, or do we bring back do we have some meaningful internationals mid-season? How would you play?
Well, the international that we've got with the All-Stars in England now is a competition in itself, and one which the All-Stars have won. A couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to commentate on that game, and I agree with Craig. There's got to be something in the calendar which means that playing for your country is available, and it again grows the game. So I'm not sure how much you block out, or or whether we reduce the games in Super League so that we can have that international break, or whatever it may be. But for me, to build on that legacy is really important.
I think there's two points there. I think Paul's absolutely right, where again we are dictated to by Super League chairmen who say that we need to have this many games. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I think we're in a position now where, something we've not talked about, Channel 4 is involvement. Now, for me, Channel 4 was one of the biggest, we've sort of just forgotten about last season, gone on to the World Cup and talking about next season. I thought Channel 4's promotion of the game, the time of the game, the whole presentation of it was far superior to Sky for me. And as a viewer, much preferred that what Channel 4 were giving me to what Sky was giving me. So we've got to grow that, and we've got to grow the revenue, because I absolutely understand from where the chairman's point of view are coming from. We want to have a full-time game, we want to pay our guys big money. To do that, we need revenue. If we're not going to get the revenue from our external sponsors, we have to get that from revenue through the people coming, these good people paying. We're lucky, we don't pay for a game, do we? So we're really, really lucky. But the clubs need that money to be able to invest in their teams. But we need less games so that the quality becomes more. So how do we do that? That's the tricky one. Now, going back to your first point about Yorkshire, Lancashire, I think we've given up on that process far too easy for my, I'm Cumbrian, born and bred.
Yorkshire versus Cumbria, sorry, yeah.
But again, that's a whole different story, Cumbria, isn't it? But we forget that we look at, from anybody who knows rugby league, the World Cup final was absolutely, a great experience. But still, the greatest game, competitiveness of greatest players, is New South Wales versus Queensland. That series is a completely different level to everything we normally see, even at international rugby, I believe. Saying that, Australia and New Zealand was probably the best game of rugby I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Like Origin
in my lifetime, probably. But generally, that Origin is the biggest level. But we forget that in 1980 it wasn't at that level. That's grown and grown and grown to be the pinnacle it is now. So what we did, we introduced the Origin, when was it? First time?
1980.
And it didn't work once, so what did we do?
It was only one game.
What did we do? We throw it in the bin.
Oh, you mean our Origin? Yeah. But I think there's two things out of that. One is IMG have recognised what you're talking about, and after this season we are losing loot fixtures, and we are losing the Magic Weekend. There will be more time to ally the seasons, which I think they can see commercial merit of doing that, which we haven't before. Also, the chairman that sat on the board of Super League have now all come off it, and I think this gang of six, which will be Rugby League commercial, will run the game. So I think we will move into a sphere on the back of the World Cup where people will look at 67,000 people turning up at Old Trafford for games that didn't involve England, and that's the second time that's happened in a World Cup final, that we virtually sold out arguably the best stadium in the north of England with a match that didn't have the home nation. So imagine what it would be like if we did have the home nation. So I think that recognition from this World Cup is already happening. I think the fact that Peter Volandis and Abdo are on the international board now means that the NRL's perspective on the international game is actually going to be heard.
Yeah.
Now, we may not agree with it, and there may be some stipulations that they want that still put them at the forefront of everything, but actually they're sitting round the table, and we haven't had that before. It's like we're an organisation, the IRL, with no money, but we're going to tell you when you're going to play internationals, and the NRL saying, well, actually, we bring all the money into the game, we effectively have a collective bargaining agreement with all the players, we'll tell you when we're releasing them. So I think all that dynamic is changing, and it's on the back of this World Cup, and the fact that even the NRL gets to a point where its market is saturated, and it sees that, what more can they do with Origin? They sell out 3 stadiums a year every year. They're looking at maybe taking it to the Far East in the future, bringing it to London in the future, taking it to America in the future. All of that ties in with the international game.
If you look at sport and generating revenue, America is always the best at that, isn't it? And look what they do with as daft as it sounds, Super League. They're not bringing Super American football.
Yeah.
They're bringing the NFL to England, aren't they? 3 or 4 times a year, selling out Wembley.
But they haven't
easily
set up a team.
Yeah.
What they've done is bought an
brought
entertainment
the product to
spectacle,
Yeah.
and the NRL should and could and may now be predisposed to doing the same. So if you were to, and we've had this debate before, that if you were to say in 5 years' time the middle state of Origin game is going to Wembley, you'd sell it out. You'd sell it out with people who are from the Southern Hemisphere that live in and around London, but I booked my ticket tomorrow. I'm sure you would.
That's what I was just going to say. You'd be on the phone straight away, wouldn't you?
And you wouldn't be trying to give tickets away, would you? You wouldn't be saying,
you
oh,
wouldn't
20
need
quid.
to.
I'm not sure I'd be buying a ticket, but I'd certainly be trying to get a gig together.
But there also wouldn't be this. We need to reduce tickets to £10 because it's rugby league. It's a premium seat. It's 80 quid. Take it or leave it.
How ridiculous
and
is the fact that the World Cup finishes and we say, come watch England versus France, it's only 15 quid. It's like, no, this is supposed to be the elite level of rugby league now, but we're giving it away at a bargain basement price. I know we know England France might not be competitive now, but the general public at large may not know that, and they might pay 25 quid or 30 quid.
I think it's putting a women's game on as well. You make it a double header, and then you pay a price that's slightly a premium on a general Super League
Should be
game.
paying less than watching Wakefield versus League. I know this is the example now. Wakefield versus, we should say Hull Cow versus
Hull FC.
But surely that's the pinnacle of the.
But
game,
that's the dilemma for the game, isn't it? Where you've got to look at that Lee versus Wakefield, Hull versus Rovers. If you look at the league table, they've got to be appealing. Now, obviously, it's a bit unfair because the Hull Rovers, whether they were in any division, it'd be appealing because of just the.
Well, I'm waiting for the Hull
netball
derby when Hull FC set up the netball team. Now Hull KO
so
derby.
But that's for us as a sport. Now, for me, we only do that by, investing in the product, in getting it right, and have we got our structures right? Have we got the coaching set up right? From the players coming through.
Well, everything that the company that have come into the game, which are stopping all loop fixtures, say we haven't, because they're coming in to make change for what they believe will be better commercially and sponsorship-wise and revenue-wise for the game, off the back of the way we've done it.
Well, the game is in no better state, I don't think, or probably even in a worse state than when we went to Super League in 1996.
Well, we were attracting the best players there, from both rugby union and from the NRL, and we're not now. But I think the fact that there's talk, and it may well not happen, that Owen Farrell is being courted. We haven't heard a big rugby union name linked with rugby league for a very long time. It may never happen.
With John Logan coming to Wakefield, £1 million.
Well, I heard he wanted to play with Paul. That's what I was doing.
Well, Wally Lewis played there.
He did.
Ray Price played there. That'll do for me.
But we're talking about things that we haven't, and I think it does come on the back of this whole Hull KR changing their ownership model, and new chairman, new investment. Was actually said in the press release is on the back of what IMG are proposing.
That's right.
And what they're proposing is a grading system. So it gets to the heart of what you were saying about we need change, how do we make the product look better? Well, the perennial debate is always about should we have promotion relegation? Are we big enough? Does that stymie a coaching structure, a junior development structure, an investment structure? And if it does, because that's what we are, because we're not football, then I think IMG bringing back in franchising by another name is at least addressing that issue. So I think we can be positive on it. Suddenly we're talking about a potential World Club challenge when it wasn't on the table before the World Cup started. It may not happen. Apparently Penrith still want some more financial guarantees, but the fact that Saints are gearing up to go over there and play 2 games
On Channel 4,
we haven't had that conversation before. So again, I'm hopeful that this World Cup has made a difference even to the domestic game.
Well, I think, again, going back to us as rugby league fans, we all want bigger, we all want better, but we don't want ourselves to change. We are, aren't we? We're all right. It's everybody else that needs to change. And that's really, really difficult if you're little old Featherstone or little old. You've got no chance of being in Super League because. But so I do get it. It's really, really difficult, but. I think that's the first I've heard of it, that you'd said that the Super League chairman was stepping out from the group. That has to be that's the best thing for me that's happened in rugby league in a long, long time, because it's turkeys voting for Christmas, isn't it? Otherwise, there's people making decisions for the good of their club rather than the good of the sport. And until we're governed by a body that is looking at the sport as a whole and looking at what's not best for Huddersfield, Salford, Hull KR, Hull FC, what's best for rugby league? And that's where we need to get to. And again, for me, this is all, what are we, nearly 30 years too late, isn't it? Again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? We had these debates and this was the plan in 1996 when we went to Super League. It should have happened then. It didn't. We've got to, a full generation, or almost 2 or 3 generations of players have gone through that mill and existed, and there's still a heartland of the game like Cumbria who still haven't got an avenue for junior players to play Super League without getting in the car and travelling 150 miles to Wigan, Warrington, Widnes, or wherever that may be.
One of the arguments about Cumbria, though, would be it still doesn't have a modern facility. And that's nothing to do with Rugby League. That's to do with the Cumbrian councils, the people of Cumbria lobbying for that kind of a facility. And if, again, IMG or the commercial arm that involves IMG starts saying facilities is a certain percentage of whether you'll be in Super League, go and get it sorted out. There's a chance for you to be in.
That is what
we're actually moving it all forward. And I think you're right that there are some very talented players still in the region. But what's the region itself done?
I get that. I'm not.
Kyle Amor was on was it St Helens, saying he's still a massive fan of merger, and even though he's from one of those two teams, and it's the dreaded word. There is a Cumbrian talking about how
it's the only way. It's the only way it will happen. I've been saying that.
But he can now have.
That's why I'm not allowed back in the town. I've been saying it since 1990.
But he can have the debate now, as indeed can you, because almost IMG is saying that table is there for you.
Well, I'm going to get banned for talking about mergers in a minute, but Pete Smith, Yorkshire Evening Post, what can we do to get more eyes on Rugby League? In terms of media coverage, we've had this World Cup, what would you change now to get more eyes on the sport?
In terms of, do you mean...
Anything at all. If you were advising IMG.
You'd have kick-offs at 7:30.
Well, I was going to say, apart from having earlier kick-offs, which is good.
7:30, yeah, but I think you've got to accept that the national media has turned its back on Rugby League or drifted away from Rugby League, and I don't think that's going to change. We still need to work with the media, though. I think a lot of clubs now think that the best way for them to promote themselves is on their own website, and I don't agree with that. I think there are certain clubs just won't put press releases out or anything. They'll announce something on Twitter and expect the media to pick that up. And I don't think that's the way to go forward. I think the game needs to engage more with the media, but obviously getting Channel 4 involved is a good thing. I think we've had 61 games on the BBC over the last 2 months, which is a good thing. I think that, and I think the World Cup and particularly the wheelchair has probably changed some opinions of Rugby League from people outside what I know you don't like the term, but heartlands of the game. I think it was notable. Traditional areas of the game. Then I think it was notable that a lot of I didn't notice the negativity in the media coverage of the World Cup that you normally get when it comes to Rugby League. I don't know if anybody else did, but I can remember in certainly 2000 and in 2013 there were pieces in the national papers, knocking pieces about Rugby League, critical of the sport, and I don't think we've had so much of that this time. But Rugby League doesn't have a presence in the national media.
But there's got to be a story to tell, Pete, hasn't there?
There are stories to tell, but we need to sell them.
But again, from my point of view, and again, I'll go back to, you guys, you love Rugby League. You're born and bred, love it. You've got, your great job. You're reporting on a sport that you love, on a daily basis. But, it's like any journalist, you're going to go and report the stories that are there. We're saying about wheelchair rugby league. If wheelchair rugby league booms like it is doing, there's going to be a journalist and there's going to be a page in every national paper, because that's what people want. Unfortunately, we've been given a product that nobody really wants. I can hold my hand up and say that last year I got rid of my Sky Sports purely because I was watching it, because it was there and I had it, not because I wanted to, because I felt like I had to. Because I'm a rugby league fan, I must watch rugby league. Didn't enjoy it, didn't enjoy the presentation, didn't enjoy any of the games. In fact, ended up being frustrated with my family because it was, so I got rid of it. Now, if I'm not watching it, what chance have we got of getting new people in and keeping those people? We've got to have a product that people want to buy into.
I think we also need to make people that come into the game a little bit more welcome. I think, look at Toronto. there was a lot of negativity towards Toronto, wasn't there? And they don't. They've gone. We've lost that.
Well,
but this was a new team and a new market opening up, and new people coming into the game who absolutely love the game. And we had people in the traditional areas saying, we don't.
Well, that's my point, Pete. Is what I was saying before. Is as rugby league, we're saying we want to expand, but we're not merging with them because we're traditional and again I'm going to say Featherstone, we're Wakefield, or we're Whitehaven and we're Workington. We deserve to be of our own right, but unfortunately, nobody's got that right to be able to do that. The sport's got to decide what they're there, and then we've got to get a product that people want to buy into. That's the key to it for me. We're entertained.
I think it's also about stories, and it's what you were saying right at the very beginning, that talking to some of the national journalists over the course of this World Cup and some of the ones that came in from abroad, they were being rung up and asked for stories on Greece. So they knew that Greece were playing England, and suddenly there's this, well, tell us a bit about Greek Rugby League, and 1,000 words on a story about why Greek Rugby League has been persecuted, who would then get beaten by 90 points at Bramall Lane, but nobody cares because they want to tell the story of these young lads who are coming out of the dressing room being mobbed by kids, even though their coach has been in tears in the press conference because this is what it's all about. It's about the women's game has given us lots of stories, because I think we're at that very early stage of, well, who is Jodie Cunningham? Who is Courtney Winfield Hill? I need to know a bit more about him. Courtney Winfield has been a professional cricketer. Well, that's more interesting than who she actually plays rugby league for. But we'll also tell the story of, she coaches the Northern Diamonds as well as plays Super League Rugby League. There's a story there. We want to tell that story. But Wheelchair is full of people who, just to get into the chair, have got a fantastic story, of which James Simpson is probably the best example at the moment, and has been a wonderful ambassador. So I think what's changing is merely reporting the game. We need to find more exciting games to report on a more regular basis, which goes back to, do we play too many games? Do they all feel and look the same? Do they all kick off too late? Why would the national media be interested when there's a football match on at the same time? But we can tell them stories. The World Cup has proved that out there is a different form of media, that particularly the long form mainstream media, broadsheet media, will tell. You might not get you might need to get in the sensational newspapers, somebody who's done something they shouldn't have done, and we've got plenty of them.
We're on the front of the Sun before the World Cup started.
We've got the old redemption stories if they need them, but I just think maybe the agenda's changed a little bit, and we've actually got more stories to tell.
But I also think as well, our way into the national media, in the world that we live in now, it's all about diversity. And maybe our way into the national media isn't, unfortunately, the pinnacle be the men's game. It's a disability game, it's the wheelchair game, it's the women's game, whereas, you just look at now, and again, it's where we've gone from women's soccer or football, which, let's be honest, probably 5 years ago wasn't a great spectacle. It wasn't good, whereas now, women's football is as equally as good, if not better, than men's football. You look at Jill Scott, who's now a national celebrity on the back of what she's done. But you saw, actually, if anybody is boring like me and watched I'm a Celebrity, her actual talent of football, when she's in the camp and playing head tennis with the other guy, her skills were phenomenal. She's not just a figure, she can play.
It was banned in our house for the politician whose name I won't mention. But we were taking Jill Scott and all that. Now, for a boringly pointless piece of analysis I did in Forty20 magazine, so I write a TV column every month, I analysed the lack of rugby league players on A Question of Sport, which is a terrible programme. And as soon as I did this piece of research, Paul McShane turned up, and then John Wilkin was on a few weeks later. He's popular in Hull, isn't he, John Wilkin? But what I did notice was the amount of women's rugby union players that were on there and whatever. And you mentioned the women's game. We haven't spoken about it yet in great detail. I've long been a proponent, perhaps, that Wakefield, Castleford and Featherstone should merge their operations into one, because, as we've seen, Leeds are at the top with Saints and with York now. But there's no whole team in the Women's Super League, not even in the second Women's Super League tier. I don't want to say this too much.
The big word.
You had the joint academy for a bit. Should Hull FC and Hull KR women wear a black and red shirt and try and put women's rugby league in Hull in that top echelon of the table?
Well, ultimately, Rich, if they keep doing what they're doing now, they're probably not going to get there. And maybe they should do something different like that. And like Craig said, with the Cumbrian mergers, if they want to stand on their own and not invest in that, then they're not going to get into the top division in Super League, and neither are the women if we keep doing that. The investment of the women's game, I'll say, I was really fortunate during COVID that I still was able to commentate on games and be live at stadiums. The best game of rugby league I watched that season through COVID was my very first women's game between Wigan and York at Wakefield.
Yes.
And the skill on show is phenomenal. And what you just said about Jill Scott's skill, what she's actually a celebrity for is a football.
Yeah.
And like you said about the women's football, it's the Euros win has catapulted it to greatness. For us with the women's game, we can catapult that to greatness with the stories of Courtney Wingfield Hill, of the backstory of it and what she does in her personal life, and not only a skill on show. And watching some of the women's games, rugby league games, are phenomenal. The skill level of some of the players and the way they play the game is refreshing, because, as you said, Craig, you cancelled your Sky Sports subscription because everything looks the same. In the women's game, to me, it doesn't.
No.
It's really refreshing because it takes me back to ultimately when I played.
When you played?
Yeah, because I love to see players showing skill, and we don't become that, like I spoke to earlier about Wayne Bennett's book. The rugby league player in the future will be 6'2", 96 kilos, be able to 100 metres in just under 11 seconds, and that's what the game's become. The women's game's completely different.
So
It's refreshing.
We've got to put money into the women's game and improve it, but also not to the point that it becomes a replica of where the men's game is.
I mean, I think the women's game's better to watch than the men's
absolutely.
game, because, like you both said, they're playing the game how it should be played.
Pure.
There's no
they've
wrestle.
They've not been overcoached. There's no wrestle. They just go out and play rugby league, and it's great. We don't want to get too carried away, because realistically, there's only in this country probably 3 or 4
good teams.
You've got Leeds, York, and Saints who'll be competitive when they play each other, but that's probably all at the moment. We need to expand that.
I think the interesting
I think
thing,
the fact Leeds are going to start paying the players is a step forward. I don't think it'll make a lot of difference.
No, the big debate after England got knocked out was Craig Richards saying, to compete with Australia and New Zealand, we need to go professional. We certainly need to recompense women for playing the game, but that's the broken time payment from 1895. We're not at just giving them money will improve the standard of the game. We've got to increase participation first, and I'm not sure we're going to do that in huge amounts in traditional areas. I think there'll be a willingness to get more girls involved. It's going to take a time for them to come through. Like the wheelchair, our blank sheet of paper is in areas where women aren't currently playing, so it's like expanding on what London Broncos are doing, what Bedford Tigers are doing, what Cardiff are doing. I think that there is almost a map that is non-geographically specific, and to follow the men's game, because that's what we've always done, would be completely the wrong way to expand on this World Cup. We need, if we're going to do taster sessions, let's have them in areas where we don't currently play, or there's a modicum of interest. And if that is Ipswich Town and ringing them up and saying you want a wheelchair team, by the way, in the summer you want a women's rugby league team, and if you do, then there's a division you can play in. There's a team up the road in Bedford you can play against. We'll get Jodie Cunningham down, who you may have seen on the Women's World Cup, to come and do a session for you. All of that, I think, is how we now need to be planning. That's where the resource should be put into, not necessarily paying the players, because I think rewatching a bit of that Australian game, and when we were there at the World Cup final, you were just in awe at some of those skills. You know, what people like Ali Brigginshaw can do under pressure, because she plays in the RLW under that kind of pressure every time she takes the field, was astonishing. Even seeing some of the individual tackles that New Zealand made, even though they lost the game by 50 points, was just ridiculous. It's a level of physicality that we don't have. Merely putting money into the sport won't give you that level of physicality. You need more games that are competitive, so you need more people playing.
Look at the Aussie team, though, what Paul was saying about people all looking the same in the men's game. That Aussie team, they're all the same build and the same height.
Not all of them.
The props could have played on the wing and vice versa. You look at New Zealand, who aren't quite so much from the professional. They have some NRLW players, but not the whole team. and England don't have any professionals. There's more of a variety of
but I also
body
think
types and things. I think that's better.
But in
You
places
don't want to
like
watch everybody look the same. There's always got to be room in the sport for a Rob Burrow or some
Small fat rolling blow.
but wheelchair. But in the case of places like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, where we've already got, if you like, the barest toehold of women playing the sport, there's massive expansion there. And it's not about money, it's about opportunity. The money that we've got should be channelled into recompensing those players that are at the elite level so that they're not out of pocket to play the game. But as much as we possibly can put into a community level.
Well, my argument about that, again, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. I love that saying, absolutely love it. It's typical of rugby league. And we talk about investment. We've invested all this money over the however long Super League's been going. My question has always been, is it a better product? Now, I said about the Australia-New Zealand game, amazing game to watch, but if you ask me for my greatest game of all time, and I'm sorry to the Hull FC fans in here, Wigan Hull FC Cup final of 85. That's my go-to game. That's an amazing game of rugby league. There's so many great skills on show that day. And we are, nearly 40 years down the line. Is the product that we present on a weekly basis in Super League as good as that game? I would say no. From an entertainment value. Now, what did them players get? Some of them had been, Wembley on Saturday, drunk and hungover all day Sunday, going to work Monday morning without any sleep, back to work.
Sky was on the bench, so there's one.
So that's saying to me, is money the answer? No, absolutely it helps, and I'm obviously very, very lucky that I played my entire career in the full-time era. So I wouldn't want lucky enough that I didn't have to go to work. But money isn't necessarily the better. It gives you obviously more security, but for me it hasn't improved the game as a whole. In fact, sometimes I think having that ability that everybody has become the same because we can all go to the gym and we can all do this and we're all so big and we're strong. The number of substitutions that we've had, I think that takes something away from the game, not adds to it. Part of the game, back when Paul and I played, was you were looking for those tired big men in the middle who, that was our role. As you watch rugby league now, and if you've got any sort of knowledge, you know what's going to happen. For me, it's like watching a play or watching a film where you know the ending. It might change every now and then, but the script's going to be the same, and everybody plays the same moves. Everybody does it. And we went through a while of having scrums where we just had our back rowers out and just used it as a tackle. They're the greatest times to attack, to do something different.
But it can change. Hull KR changed it 2 years ago.
Well, Wigan did a little bit as well last year, didn't it? Kicking
so I think,
scrums
again, that's partly down to if you've got a coach who wants to follow a formula because they don't want to get relegated, it'll be 5 drives and a kick. If you're prepared to have someone who has a philosophy where attack is primary but your defence has got to be good enough to make up the mistakes...
A great example of that.
Then I think even the problem of what you're talking about, which is correct, and we all have fantastic memories of games where skill overrode physicality, is that once you become full-time, physicality is primacy.
Yep. But also, I will say, Phil, as well, I did go to many Whitehaven versus Bramley games, which weren't very good either. So well, there is the other side to
in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
But there are opportunities for coaches to play a different way, and things do change. They are cyclical. I think it might be worth having a debate with people who know far more than we do about the tactics that Sean Wayne employed for England, and to a lesser extent maybe Craig Richards. Were they too formulaic? Did he pick players who were only going to play a certain way, and was that to their detriment as the tournament went on because they couldn't change anything?
But we had this debate, me and Craig, before we started today. What would you have changed if you were Sean Wayne from game 1 of the World Cup, where they win by 50 points plus, to the semi-final where they lose against the same opposition? Surely Sean would go back in his mind and go, if we get it right like we did with that day, but why would he change Mickey McLaurin for Salford's hooker, I forget his name, Andy Ackers, which is an easy change to make if you want an attacking Andy Ackers hooker who'd been brilliant all year, but he'd already won by 50 in 3-4 weeks earlier, so he goes back to type. When you speak about does throwing more money at the game make it better as a spectacle, and coaches who coach the game, I'd say within the 12 Super League coaches we've got, only Tony Smith is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only Tony Smith is different.
Absolutely.
So all of a sudden, the coach that allows freedom of expression, and well, if you're going to play like that, you make an error, you've got to be able to defend. But that's only 7% of the Super League coaches.
Paul
Rowley does a little bit, yeah.
And Rowan
Smith maybe will do it as well. Exactly that. But then you go to a whole different argument where I coached at Lee in 2015, where we got promoted through Hooker being relegated. And then we go into the Super League behind the 8 ball because you're so late getting in. And then there's a middle 8s competition the following season. And Lee, under the normal structures today, wouldn't have been relegated because Widnes finished bottom. But they went into a whole different league, what we tried, where all of a sudden then the top teams, because there's no threat of relegation, can cherry pick the players that they want, while the teams in the bottom 4 are worried about their status in Super League. So then it becomes about money for the players. And we was then relegated the following season through the middle 8s. And how can this be right for a player that has signed a 3-year contract at Lee, and then there's 2 rooms in Lee? One, where you're told you're getting sacked. And 2, a player welfare from the RFL to try and help you find another club. And so all of a sudden, does throwing money at it, or does a franchise system then allow coaches to coach players to play what they see?
No. It allows them to play more younger
but it allows them not to be relegated.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, when I was at Lee, all of a sudden, you try and target the first 11 games to win 7 or 8, so that you're almost in the top 6 before the real teams, St Helens and Leeds, start playing. And you peter out because you're a newly formed team in the Super League with so many new players. But would it be better to have the franchise system where you throw the same amount of money and it may allow more Tony Smiths, Rowan Smiths and Paul Rowleys
But
to
it's bigger
coach?
than that, Paul, isn't it? I think it's absolutely fundamentally bigger than that, because for me, if I'm Joe Bloggs and I coach Hensingham under-11s and I'm a 32-year-old, 33-year-old bloke, I'm going to coach like what I watch on telly. So I'm going to say, right, you, to my right back rower, you're in that channel and you don't move. To my right centre, you're there, and we play this, and we've got to complete, we've got to kick well. So I think we're coaching the skill out of our next generation of players. It's about, a couple of years ago, I say this, I can't think when it was. So it's not current as in last season. It was 3 or 4 years ago. I watched an academy game where the actual centre from the left side came over round to the right hand side, and the opposition centre was pointing at the ref and almost saying, he can't go. And he didn't know what to do, because it was like, he's from over there. If he comes over, he will blow.
Yeah, he shouldn't be here.
He can't come over to my side.
Fair,
what am I going to do now? I've got to choose between which one of these two. And again, that's joking and tongue in cheek, obviously, but it was that. He was like, what do we do?
But a story I'll tell about Brian Noble was the greatest British coach at the time when he played at Bradford, and we brought over Andrew Johns to Warrington, and he was asked a question, Brian Noble, about his team and his structure of his team. He had Paul and Deakin, and they never swapped sides. They never went up the other side of the field. Well, what if you had Andrew Johns? Well, he can do what he wants. Well, why can he do what he wants and we not expect Deakin to be able to do what he wants, or for Robbie Paul to be able to do what he wants? Why is our greatest British coach at the time, Brian Noble was the best British coach, who said, if Andrew Johns comes, he can do it. Well, why can't we produce an Andrew Johns?
I was lucky enough probably to play in the greatest side of, or one of the greatest sides of our eras in the early 90s at Wigan, and I remember one day we were training and Graham West said something to Sean Edwards, and Sean said, Westy, you pick the team, I'll decide how we play.
And Sean's now coach of France, and Graham's driving a taxi.
And for me that's it. You pick the team. Once we go over that line, I decide what we do.
But the other thing about that as well is, if you have a system whereby relegation is taken out, not only is it economically more efficient, and there has to be an open door to allow progressive teams still to come into that top flight, and there has to be a realisation that if you don't live up to whatever the expectations,
that comes with
you're
the
out
system
of
IGN, doesn't it?
What you might get, apart from coaches that feel less pressure to coach teams not to lose, is the opportunity to play more talented young players. Because I just think at the moment we are seeing kids maybe in the academy division and we don't see them come through quickly enough into first team. But you can throw them in. They can make mistakes. It's not going to cost you if you get Mikey Lewis playing more games because his defence isn't quite what you need if there's a big prop forward running at him. But in terms of attack, you can't coach him because he's got that natural ability.
But to have that, Phil, as well, we need to get the structure of the game right now. The biggest crime that we've committed over the last 10 years in Rugby League is getting rid of reserve grade Rugby League.
But proper reserve grade Rugby League.
Yeah,
because at the moment it's a complete...
it's
a
a
mix.
farce.
It's a mix.
Farce.
Yeah.
An absolute farce. Whereas we're all about player welfare. Player welfare is, and it has to be. But then we're saying to a young kid, the first time you ever play against a man is on your Super League debut.
The other thing you could do, if you want to look at refashioning how the sport looks, is not have a reserve grade Rugby League, but have a proper system of teaming up with other clubs. So that you do, and again, I'm not saying because they do it in Australia it works, but actually a more of a twinning arrangement whereby your younger kids do get the opportunity to play in the championship against men.
We have to do it properly, Phil.
Yes, exactly. And
you can't send me as the coach for one game when you do it. Absolutely. You're saying to me, right, you're spending this year at Cornwall.
And the coaching structures have to align, because you don't go and learn how to play the game in one direction at one place and then come back and expect to be able to do it at your homeland. But if we're serious about whatever we call it, twinning arrangements, for example, then there's no reason why that doesn't help the whole rather than the individual. And then reserve grade isn't quite so important because the kids are getting the experience that they need to play against men. I think there's also a case for then saying once you've established that domestically, you roll it out to saying, right, well, it's your responsibility to look after a European nation. It's your responsibility to look after an African nation. You can bring a kid from Ghana to play in your academy
But also
structure.
as well, if we had 4 or 6 games less, and you've got that squad, you've got the ability then to have a proper reserve grade.
So now we know Brian Noble's structure is the reason why Robbie Hunter Paul runs around on the pitch pre-match because he's got that freedom.
There's only ever one side.
It happens all of the time. I spent part of Peter Sharp was great when he came over to Hull FC, and I remember injuring my hamstring before the season started, and I missed the first 6 weeks, and my first game back was Hull KR. And all these 6 weeks, it strips everything back to just, we need to get to the end of sets, we need to do it. It was painful to watch when I was injured because I wasn't on the field. And I knew I was coming back for the Derby game, and I went into him, and I said, he said, "Oh, you'll start." I said, "Please tell me we're not playing that crap level of rugby that you've been trying to get these players to play." He said, "You go do what you want." And that was, for me, music to ears. But there's not many like that. How do we get so that the players are developed in that way to be able to play eyes up rugby, which is pure, like you said earlier, everything's the same. Why have you cancelled your Sky subscription? Because everything's the same. But if we've not got the relegation, it might allow a coach to coach a player to be able to play the most pure form of football.
Why
the
is
85 Cup final.
Why is it that the most, and it might just be my take of it, most coaches are front row forwards?
How does that tell you as well?
How does that work out?
Forwards, what's going on?
But and again, we shouldn't compare everything to the way they do it in Australia, but they are the market leaders, so normally in any form of business you at least look at what the market leaders are doing to try and understand how they got to that position. They've never had relegation. Now, there is the possibility that the Australian team that we saw that came over, there are people in that team who were given a chance when they were very young and adapted to it, and the pressure wasn't on them not to play, it was to show what they could do, because if they made a mistake, the worst thing that could happen is they'd lose 2 points.
Yeah, and unfortunately when I was at Leigh, if you made a mistake, the worst thing that could happen was you was in one room to be sacked and your contract on, and the next room to be looked after as a player.
That in terms of player development.
Completely. And it affects you as a coach, because ultimately not every player can play like that, mate. Not every player can play in the most purest form. A Mikey Lewis who can attack over.
Latrell Mitchell was sensational. He didn't get all the plaudits because of what Josh Adokar was doing outside of him, but a lot of what Adokar did was having Mitchell into. But Mitchell, as a young kid, was playing as a teenager at first grade level. Stephen Crichton, who was arguably one of the players of the tournament for Samoa. Yeah. I remember him coming over here as an Australian schoolboy, probably 4 or 5 years ago we saw him in a game, and we thought, oh, that kid's got talent. He was in the Penrith first team virtually the year after. How many kids have we got playing in our Super League first teams who are teenagers, who are going to be there for the long haul and playing for it, building the next England team around?
Well, the majority of them are arguably from one club, and we spoke about this earlier, about you play roster management. When, arguably last year's St Helens team was the greatest win in the 4 grand finals they've had from it, because they plan, and they send their young team over to Australia. It wasn't long ago that Nathan Cleary was over here with Crichton and his Penrith young kids playing against St Helens, and all of a sudden now that the St Helens players get the experiences of that. Lachlan Cooke leaving, Theo Fargs leaving. All of a sudden you've got Wellesby who comes in and a Dodd, and it's not an accident. But them young players like Wellesby and Dodd have obviously been over to Australia as well to sample what it is like out there when they did go over and play a game. And arguably the benchmark for our team should be that, because they develop players. And Wellesby is a rugby player. He's not a centre or a winger or a fullback. He's a rugby player, and he plays rugby in almost its purest form.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they get it so right, St Helens, with the development of juniors. And then Lachlan Cooke leaves the club, arguably be the best fullback the season before. And it's seamless, and they still win a grand final because they've developed from, not just from that within there, that they've developed and taken them over for different experiences in Australia, or they've played against Nathan Cleary's St Helens Penrith team back in the past.
I think there's two things on that. I think, you talk about the Australia, we've got to have a salary cap that's a fair salary cap. Now, we can all agree that it's not enough. But also as well, if there's only half the teams can spend it, what's the point of it anyway? So if you're not going to get a level playing field, there's no point having it in the first place. You're not just let people spend what they want, for my eyes. And then the second when you've got relegation, your budget that you'll get allocated is always going to be for today. There's no investment in tomorrow. Now, my argument is that, and it always has been, we look at our coaching and we look at our structures, and I'm not looking at any club in particular, but in my eyes, there's no confirmation that my junior coaches, who should be the best coach in your club, by the way, because he's bringing your next generation of players through, is any better than the coaches at any amateur club in the country. Now, for me, there's too many coaches at these clubs who get this job because they get a tracksuit and say, I'm a coach at Castleford Tigers, I'm a coach at Wakefield, I'm a coach at whoever, rather than them being the best person for that role. Now, until we get the best people in our junior development, we are never going to develop the game for our next generation of coming through. But like you said, while we're always worried about where we're going to be next season, every penny that we add is going to be into the top team to make sure that we're going to get that money again the year after.
Unwillingly, you've led me where I was going to go anyway. Because I'm going to talk about the goldfish.
I'm really good at that.
I'm
really good at that. You should know
it's
that.
also how we used to work together, isn't it? In the good old days. Good old Ken Bates. Thank goodness he exists. Because I know we're running out of time, and we've got to talk about the two Hull clubs. But because you mentioned tracksuits, you must have been gutted that in your time at Leeds you didn't get to wear one with a leopard's backside on.
I think the famous picture of Derek is that I'm going to try and pinch that hoodie he's got, just so I can get something on that that resembles it. It's really interesting when you said about coaches and development of coaches. I went for a job at Hull to coach the young kids.
This is an amazing story.
This is an unbelievable story. So I'm interviewed by a panel of 3 people at Hull, and I wanted to do it because my nephew's now in the first team at Hull. He played his first couple of games last year, and I wanted to try and get to be able to develop the next generation, and he was a big part of me wanting to go for this job. So I interviewed for this job, and he rings me up and he says, "We're not going to give you it because you're overqualified." and it's immense, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I'm saying, so I'm offering you my services, and I'm overqualified, doing it at a level of finance which suits you, and you're telling me you don't want me. So how do we then develop the next generation of players? And I'm not saying the guy who got the job was a bad coach or anything like that, but to ring me up and say I'm overqualified almost tells me how mental our game is, because if we feel like the best man for the job is overqualified, how the hell are we getting this guy on the file that says we've got him on? And then you don't take him. And I'm going, okay, fair enough. And I've never been back for a coaching job after it. I just thought, what's the point?
I work in the real world now. I had obviously 10 really good years in a pretend world of professional sport. And, since then I've worked 20 years in the NHS, which is, I suppose, not really the real world, because that's another bonkers place to work as well. But if you put that scenario into me, I'm a senior manager now, and if one of my teams come and said, look, we've had this guy, he's absolutely amazing, but he's overqualified, I'd shoot that person and throw them out and get him in to do that job, because that is just absolutely ludicrous that somebody of Paul's stature, and just imagine those young kids like that in awe of what he could teach for that not to be.
the way he would have taught the game to be played.
It's just ridiculous.
And you mentioned it, the best coaches in your coaching team should be your youth coaches, because they are developing the next generation of players for the first team to be able to use. And they are so important.
But if they're being told to develop them in a style that the first team wants to play, then you're knocking the edge off them before they even get to the first team.
Of course you are.
But I think
unless you're a coach like Tony Smith or Rowan Smith, because for me that's the right way.
I think you've got to throw Matty Pete into that a bit. It's still a little bit structured, but you look at the Wigan team of last year.
Maybe it was Lee Breers.
Or maybe
it was
Lee
interesting
Breers.
to see how they coach this year without him.
Absolutely. But we're
Some coaches are prepared to take risks, so even in difficult situations. Just thinking of Willie Poaching last season, when we're talking about you have to be prepared to let kids make mistakes, and most coaches in that situation don't, because there's too much jeopardy. But they were near the bottom of the table. I remember Lewis Murphy, who emerged as a real talent, the winger at Wakefield. I think it was his debut against Leeds at.
He dropped the ball.
High bomb, drops it, Leeds score. They were 30-0 up at half time. But Willie picked him. It might not have been the next week, but Willie put him back in and said to him, well, don't worry about it. It's your debut.
But would Willie?
I like you. I'm impressed by what you've done.
Would Willie have
I'll give you
picked
a
him
chance.
if Tom Johnson hadn't been injured?
Would Willie have picked him knowing he's going to get the sack anyway?
Probably.
But all I'm saying is,
he gave a kid a chance.
Yeah.
He was prepared to give him another
But
chance. After he'd
sometimes
messed
it's
up.
injuries that mean you give kids a chance, and I'd like to see kids given a
But
chance.
regardless whether
always
there's
gonna be the
promotion or
case, though,
relegation,
isn't
that's irrelevant. You're always going to be, as a coach, whether there's promotion or relegation, you're going to pick your best team.
Absolutely.
Because if you're involved in any kind of sport, and if you're like me, you're involved in sport since I was a 3-year-old kid. If we say we're having a game of tiddlywinks now, I want to win. If we're all playing, I want to win. And if I don't, I'm going to go away disappointed. Because if you're in sport, you're built into that. Now, when you played at Hull, and the era that I did, you get used to losing. And it becomes second nature. But you still want, you know what I mean? It's that competitive nature. So you also know as a junior that you've got to go in and you've got to give it your best shot. And you know that however well you play, you could be man of the match and score 6 tries. And I lived this for 5 years. I knew, however well I played, if Sean was fit the next week, I was out. But you also understand that it can be so frustrating, and it made me come to Hull, the worst thing I ever did. I don't think everybody knows that as a professional decision. But I knew that it don't matter how well I play, as long as what I needed to get into my head, or what you need to get in as a junior, is that you do enough that when next time he's injured, you're straight back in. They're not looking and say, well, actually, we've given him an opportunity, we've given him another opportunity, and both times he's failed. Maybe he isn't up to this. You've got to go and get that mindset. I know when Tom Johnson's fit, I ain't going to play. But when he's not fit, I'm straight into the team. And that's what you've got to do. And then you become more appealing, not only to the club that you're at, but to other players who can then come in and say, well, actually, this kid can play. He can't play here, and we'll take him there, and he'll become a better player because he's in that environment.
You're trying to get Lewis Murphy sold.
Tom Johnson's gone, hasn't he? Lewis is back in.
Making it sad. You always told me goldfish bowl. Hull is a goldfish bowl, and we've got a goldfish bowl with 2 new goldfish in as the coaches. I don't know where this is going. The most important thing, it seems from the outside sometimes, is who finishes above each other. But surely now,
Hull Cup, isn't it?
yeah. But when are we going to see a whole club at
Top 4
back in the grand final?
I agree
because
completely.
it's been a long time.
We are tarnished in this city with rose-tinted glasses, black and white or red and white, and it's the only thing that matters at times to the supporters of the clubs. I've got friends in both red and white and black and white, and you know, the last game of the season where Rovers win and they go above them by 1 place, and they're hammering the black and whites. I'd be more worried that I'm not in the top 6 as a supporter of a club. Stop telling me how good you are by finishing 1 place above us in the table off 1 game at the end of the season, and start worrying about developing enough at your club to be able to be in the top 6 and to make a grand final again. It's such a surreal city to be a part of and live in.
But that's an easy thing to say, Paul, as a player, because we played the game for monetary value. We played because we were good at it and we had a bit of skill and we wanted to win. Now, when you go to a working environment and you're sat next to a Rovers fan all day, it's a unique environment, isn't it? Where the only true city where there's both teams. If you're a fan, you're fanatical. That's what it is, isn't it? You guys, you're here. Shows how balmy you all are anyway on a Saturday afternoon sat here. But when you're a fan, certainly in this city, fanatical of their club. Now, you haven't got those grand finals and things to pin on. The next best thing is, as long as we beat them, I don't really care, because then I can go to work and say, we beat you, we're above you, la 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 la, happy days. So I get it. Now, it's the what I don't think that's the fans' issue. Absolutely, we've not. I think some of the times is we're not doing great, but we're doing better than them. So at least we're not them. Yeah, it's better than them. What we've got to do is the club's problem to improve that. The great sets of fans. Both, you and I played at both. Great fans and support. The away following from both teams says it all, doesn't it? The number of Hull KR and LFC fans at away games is fantastic, but they pin their hopes on that because they're not getting to the finals. It's the club's job to get those teams to the final because they are big clubs. Certainly, Hull FC have had the better of it over lately, but Rovers are historically a great side, and they need to be back up at the pinnacle and being involved and winning finals as well. But it's the club's mentality, I think. The fans will get behind it, and if they do it, then they're even going to be even more so, aren't they, of singing and dancing. But I get it.
It's interesting now because they're very different models. Hull KR own their own ground. They've got new investment coming in. They've got development potential. Got a very strong foundation. They'd probably are still maybe signing some players who fill a void rather than perhaps are developing enough of them to have a full team of local players. Hull FC is more, we don't own the ground. We probably have a bigger support base, but there is more pressure on us to win games and finish higher up the league. Be very interested to see which model comes out on top, particularly now with Tony Smith moving from one to the other.
Well, particularly now with that, because the rugby league model has been built at Hull KR for 3 years by Tony, and it's going to be tweaked by Willie Peters. But the model for Hull FC, one of the things I've said about Hull FC this year is it's the most. Me and Mark Wilson sit down every year and he says, "I think they'll be great this year," and I say, "I'm telling you now, Mark, they're flatter to deceive." He knows they're flatter to deceive. They've got this squad where they spend a full salary cap, but there's just something at that club, a mentality of something where they can't get out into a top 6 or try and make a grand final or a Challenge Cup again. And the two models rugby league wise, because Tony's left his footprint at Hull KR and going to LFC, but this year I'm optimistic about LFC as opposed to being pessimistic. As I have been over the last 4 years.
I think he'll build
and I've been proved right. Yes, in my eyes, yes.
He has to be let do what he wants to do.
Yeah, and this is with Tony because I speak with Tony regularly, or I speak with him, and we meet for dinner and stuff. He's such a complex and fascinating man, and ultimately, wherever he's been, he's left that place in a better spot than he found it. So the same at Hull KR, he did the same at Warrington, and he did the same at Leeds. Even though he went into a great team
and at Huddersfield.
So all of a sudden now I'm thinking, I'm optimistic because his track record tells me that.
But he builds a team rather than a group of individuals.
And I knew straight away, Rich. I did the radio show on Monday in Hull, and I was booked on there anyway, and it was when Brett Hodgson was announced he was being sacked. And I texted Tony and said, if the rumours are true, congratulations. I've never spoke to them. And I thought, well, that's a lie. But the club, if it is true that the club haven't spoken to you, the club deserve get them over the hot coals. The owner and the CEO, James Clark, that to me would be a travesty. But first thing I knew he'd do is punt Jake Connor. And I'm not saying Jake hasn't left of his own accord, but he's not a Jake Connor fan or type of player in his team. So he's made a really good decision where the season before, they announced it on Sky Sports News that he's signing a new contract, and it's an uproar in the city. We've still got the best number one. All of a sudden you're going to see a completely different LFC this year because they're not going to be reliant on Jake, and they've got two young halfbacks that are under 30 years of age this year. They've brought in Brad Dwyer at 9, and all of a sudden you think, where's this team going to go? And that's the most fascinating element for me, which makes me optimistic this year. I might have a conversation with Mark where he says that they'll be rubbish this year, and I'll say they'll be good, and hopefully I'll be proved right again. But yeah,
I will just enjoy watching it from the outside. It's a bit like Leeds United. I was just thinking about
I don't think you
when
can
you're
mention them here.
No, it's okay. When you're talking about away fans and Leeds United fans, bang on, we'd have taken more. And that's what Hull KR and Hull FC are. And Leeds are only bothered about beating Man United, really. They're not getting relegated. Because as long as they beat Man United, you can brag about that for a while.
It's a view of the club, though, isn't it? And like Craig said earlier, when I said, we have these tinted spectacles, black and white, red and white in Hull, and it's for the clubs to get them up to that level where they are competing again in major finals.
And I do think that's where the IMG influence will help both of those clubs, because they're going to be given a blueprint and it'll be down to you. And I think Hull KR have already acknowledged that. Hull FC have got some limitations with not owning their own ground, which Wigan will have. Any club that doesn't have their Huddersfield access to their own facility are going to find it's harder and harder, because the rugby league will need to be the priority for that club, and not, well, you can play on a Thursday because we've got a game on the following Saturday, and even though we're in the 5th division of football, we take precedence over you. It's going to be really an interesting dynamic, but again, it comes down to, this is the legacy of the World Cup. Can we actually make it count?
Can I ask you guys, and flip this over a little bit, as a so-called expert on what we're talking about, to flip it over to a field where you guys are the expert on? There's been a lot of, over the last couple of years, new badges and stuff that are media friendly and digitally friendly, and what's your thoughts on that? Because I know certainly when Wigan's was changed there was uproar, and Hull KR have certainly changed theirs as well, haven't they?
Changed the badge this
is
year.
that the way sport as a whole is moving forward to that digital platform?
I think if you change it and it's good, then it's all right. If you change it and you're late,
so what are you trying to say?
Yeah.
That was coming.
Hull KR came out with this, and Wigan did the same, didn't they? With here's why we've changed the badge and this, and this. If you explain it and the explanation makes sense, if you don't like the badge, you don't like the badge, do you? It's like when a new kit comes out. Some people like Hull's third fair shirt, or some people think it's a load of nonsense, but it's there to sell some shirts, isn't it?
All I would say is that the classic example is the Rhino, which has no connection whatsoever with Leeds. But because they worked hard to make that brand unique,
they are the Rhinos now.
Can't be anything else.
If you search Rhinos on Twitter, the first thing that comes up is.
So you do it right, take people with you, but work really hard at the beginning. There was a couple of really clever things that they got Ronnie the Rhino to stand for Parliament.
Now he probably win.
He couldn't do any worse.
He wasn't
he didn't
popular.
lose his deposit.
He wasn't popular at the start, though. There was a vote. It was in our paper, and I think Loiners was one of the choices, and Loiners won by a mile. Yeah, but the club said, well, but thanks for your information, but thanks for your input, but we're not going to take any notice. And people didn't like Rhino, but
it's how you
it
works.
But they've stuck with it, haven't they? Going back full circle to the origin debate of us giving it up after week one. They've stuck with it, and now they're the Rhinos, aren't they?
Wildcats didn't really work, did it? Because
that was when I was there.
If they'd gone with Wakefield Wildcats without the Trinity bit, it might have worked. But because they stuck to the past and the future and made this complete mess, which no one knew what the name was. As long as you don't say Hull Sharks. That was a great
But that would have.
When they had that really bad.
That would have worked.
Oh, but you left by that. Wigan had that really bad Warriors shirt.
Yeah, I played in that. Yeah. That was because that was the infamous '97 season, which was the fated World Club Challenge, where greatest holiday of my life, a month in Australia, never played a game. Yeah, that was
You're like the modern day. You're like the previous Ash Golding though, when he went not Ash Handy, sorry, when he went to on the Great Britain tour and never played.
Yeah.
So New Guinea flew him out.
Yeah.
They flew him out, as a replacement on the way to Papua New Guinea. Took him out with Leeds' pre-season training and didn't play.
That was a great story from that, Rich. Is we were based in the Gold Coast. Bonkers. A rugby team away from home in Australia, based on the Gold Coast for 21 days. I think I did 17 days on the beer, in the Gold Coast, and never played a game. Gary Conley played all 3 and did 18.
I've just been on a golfing holiday with Gaz, and he's still not changed one bit, has he? He was last out, first out, last in every day, every single day.
No, it was a great holiday, absolutely great holiday. And, we were sat in the hotel. It's probably not politically correct now, but we were sat in the hotel just in the lobby because we were just bored out of our heads in the daytime, and the lifts opened and Rolf Harris came out of the lift.
You could have said something worse. So, that's fine. That's fine.
Bizarre.
It could have been far worse.
Mental.
We're running out of time. I'm going to get kids out of the car. Well, I'm not going to get kids out.
Well, I've already got a parking ticket, so mine ran out at 3:30 because you guys were late.
Well, apologies.
Well, we've done the extra 20 minutes. That's why you got the parking ticket.
Any questions? As long as they're quick. Or quick answers. No. Excellent. Thank you for coming. This is the end of our tour, which means we get paid.
Has it been cultural?
Has it been cultural?
Oh, only you can answer that.
There's some books. There's books. We've got people into libraries, haven't we? Apart from Newcastle, where no one turned up.
And you fell off the stage.
And I fell off the stage, which I think is probably a highlight of the World Cup for me, apart from Brazil, Canada, obviously. And,
you have all these ideas and they're really good and everything, so you're going to be speaking to the people and coming in to chat.
Yeah, Phil, you're going to talk to IMG and tell them. Tell them all this.
We've sent them some stuff, but whether they want to take it on board... there are some really clever people now involved in IMG, far cleverer than certainly I am. There's a gentleman who's coming on the board called Peter Hutton, who's known for a very long time, who is currently at Meta. He knows everything there is to know about sports rights negotiations, what makes a sport exciting. Having somebody like him now involved in the sport fills me with confidence.
They sent sort of a questionnaire around to everybody involved in the media and people and said, if you've got any ideas, please tell us. So I thought that was encouraging.
Absolutely encouraging. What you said earlier, if you do what you've always done, you get what you always get, and it's obviously not been done at that level before. No. With you guys speaking about it. I'm really optimistic about the IMG involvement, and not only the IMG involvement, the Ralph leaving and the change of guard at level of governance level of the sport, where we go with that. There's lots of other different debates.
And I think
match review panel
that coming on the back of the World Cup, which is where we sort of started this debate. The World Cup has given us the platform for IMG to take a product, some of which is new, and say, we're not doing it right, let's change it. And if that's the legacy of this World Cup, that'll do for me.
And I don't want to finish on a negative, but we've got to remember that we can have the best company in the world that are running it. If we don't get the product right on the pitch, it's absolutely irrelevant.
Yeah. What was Maurice Lindsay like?
Maurice wasn't there when I was there. He'd left by the time. But I have spent many a day with Maurice. And again, a more passionate rugby league fan you could not meet. And again, a lot of people knock Maurice, but the game is where it is today, good or bad, because of Maurice Lindsay.
He was a benevolent dictator. Ken Bates was at Radio Yorkshire. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here today. Yeah. Especially because he paid for that recorder I nicked. Peter, thank you very much. Everyone read the Yorkshire Evening Post. Craig, do you want to promote anything?
No, I'm fine.
Enjoy rugby league?
Yeah, we do.
New Forty20 out next week.
There you go. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for watching. It's not even live, but thank you for listening. And the World Cup's finished, and this is it now. And I'm sad. So that is the negative note. We'll end the podcast off. Yeah.